Hey YouTube, Ethan here. In today's video, I'll be sharing 10 tips that I have for playing Oxygen Not Included. This video was inspired by questions and comments that I see on Reddit or Discord servers, and it is for players who are transitioning from their early game to their mid-game phase, or that have been comfortably playing the mid-game for a while now and are looking for enhancements. Stick around because even if you're a seasoned player, you may learn a few tips for improving your colony. I hope that you're able to use these tips to help improve your runs, or maybe have more fun during your playthroughs. Once you get to the end, let me know if you were able to learn anything new that you're going to implement for your playthroughs. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Tip number 1 is a very easy way to max out your decor during your playthrough. Maximizing your decor is not about statues or paintings. Yes, they can definitely help in areas where you have void space, and perhaps you want to fill that void space with something that looks interesting and cool to not only make your colony more aesthetically pleasing, but to help out the decor of your duplicants so they can increase their morale. Many people don't know that one of the easiest ways that you can maximize decor is simply building different tiles where your duplicants live. If we take a look at the decor overlay of my base, I'm using very little statues and not a lot of paintings, and yet my decor is almost maxed out all over the place, even where I'm using heavy machinery, such as auto sweepers or conveyor loaders. You can see that most of my decor is coming strictly from the carpeted and wooded tiles that I have built all over my base where my duplicants are going to be spending most of their time. Now, wooden tiles can be quite difficult to obtain because they do take 200 pieces of wood, which you can only get if you have arbor trees. However, carpeted tile only needs basic material like sandstone or granite and reed fiber. If you've built a bathroom setup, you should already have reed fiber production through frimble reeds that are consuming your polluted water from your washrooms. In my setup, I'm reusing the water that is coming from my bathrooms and sending it back into my washrooms. But you don't need to do this. If you have a sustainable source of water and you need to make an excessive amount of reed fibers for making carpeted tiles, you can simply skip the water sieve altogether and have the polluted germy water coming from your duplicants head straight into hydroponic farms which have thimble reeds planted in them. This will continue to produce reed fiber throughout your entire playthrough, which will allow you to make carpeted tile all over your base. Now you may be saying to yourself, Ethan, why would I want to use carpeted tile? This is going to slow down my duplicants by 25%. And yes, this is totally true if you're using the carpeted tile on the ground where your duplicants are running, but this is not entirely necessary. You can see in the washroom that I have a maximum 120 decor and I'm using the carpeted tiles on my ceiling. Here's a situation where I have the standard 4 tile high living quarters that most players build for their base. On the bottom, I'm using regular sandstone tiles that your duplicants are going to be constantly running on. And as the ceiling, I'm using carpeted tile. This still gives me insanely good decor without compromising my duplicants' run speed. Of course, this means that if you intend to use carpeted tile on your ceilings, then the next floor above will have carpeted tile on your floor, which means your duplicant's run speed will be reduced. So in order to address this, you would need to build tiles on top of the carpeted tile and then change the layout of your base. And that brings me to tip number 2, which is increasing the run speed of your duplicants. This is something that is often overlooked and not considered when you're designing your base. A regular tile, regardless of what material it's made out of, gives your duplicants plus 25% run speed. This is very good, especially since tiles are fairly cheap to produce and the materials to build them are readily available. Wood tiles give your duplicants a plus 25% run speed, but they also increase decor to a radius of 3 tiles around them. If you have access to plastic in the early game, such as from glossy Drecos, you might consider building plastic tiles, which increases your duplicant's run speed by 50%. This is a pretty substantial boost if you're going from 0% or from 25% if you're using regular tiles. And if you have a glossy Dreco farm set up early enough in your playthrough, you may have an excessive amount of plastic already within your colony. It's also worth noting that it only takes 100 plastic to make a plastic tile, while it takes 200 of any other material to make a regular tile. And glossy Drecos will pretty much continue to produce plastic indefinitely as long as you're able to feed them. So it's definitely worth considering switching your flooring to plastic later on in the game if you have the necessary plastics available. Metal tiles also give your duplicants a 50% speed boost, and also with added decor. Metal tiles require refined metal, so these can be harder to come by unless you have access to a copper or gold volcano. However, one thing you might want to consider is lead. Lead is a refined metal that is not useful for very many things because of its low overheat temperature. It can be used for radiation blocking, but beyond this, you might have an excessive amounts of lead after you've already mined out your oil biome. When we compare all these different materials and tiles to insulated tiles have a negative decor and they do not contribute anything to run speed at all. So try to avoid using insulated tiles as your main flooring throughout your playthrough. A very quick tip number 3 is to not build the interior of your base out of insulated tiles. As we've already discussed in tip number 2, insulated tiles do not contribute anything to your duplicant's run speed, and they lower your decor. But possibly the worst side effect of building your entire base out of insulated tiles, even the interior walls and floors, is that they cost 400 of each material that you're trying to use. This means that your duplicants spend way more time sourcing, delivering, and then building these tiles than they would any other tile that you could use throughout your colony. For example, the regular tile only uses half the amount of material that that insulated tiles do, from 400 to 200. Metal tiles only use 100, but they're harder to come by. Plastic only uses 100, and they can be fairly easy to obtain. And of course, wood tiles use 200 pieces of wood, which can also be hard to obtain. But avoid this beginner player trap of using insulated tiles for your flooring because it is completely unnecessary, unless you're trying to prevent heat transfers from one area to another, such as a kitchen that I have set up within my base. This kitchen uses wood tiles for the walls, floors, and ceilings in order to give my duplicants run speed and add a decor bonus. I have cold water running through the wood tiles in order to keep the temperature low, and this is surrounded by insulated tiles in order to keep that low temperature contained within this room. In fact, this helps keep the kitchen relatively cold, even though I have two intensive heat producing buildings inside the kitchen. So they definitely have their uses within your living quarters of your base, but avoid using them whenever possible for your walls, floors, and ceilings. Tip number 4. Be generous with your airflow tile usage throughout your base. Airflow tiles help the carbon dioxide collect quicker at the very bottom of your base so they can be dealt with accordingly. In my case, I'm using a carbon skimmer to filter out the carbon dioxide. Another advantage to having airflow tiles in all of your rooms is that it helps keep the airflow constant, which helps with heat dissipation throughout your entire colony. Taking a look at the temperature overlay, we can see that each bedroom has fairly consistent temperature. I also have airflow tiles on the side of my kitchen, which helps the room pressurize by allowing air in through other places than just a pneumatic door. Tip number 5 is skipping the manual airlock. In all my time playing Oxygen Not Included, I've never found a legitimate reason to use the manual airlock, and if I did, I've long forgotten about it because I haven't used it since. The idea behind the manual airlock is that it blocks liquid and gas flow between one room to another. You're likely not going to be using a door that your duplicants can open unsupervised because that would allow the liquid that you're trying to block to flow from one room to the other. In this case, you might want to use something like the mechanized airlock that can be controlled manually, or simply a wall. More importantly, the manual airlock implies that it's going to block bad gases from transferring from the outside of your base to the inside of your base. And I see many new players using the manual airlock even in their mid-game portion of their playthrough. If you ever feel the need to use a manual airlock for blocking gases, you likely want to be using what's called a liquid lock instead. And I have an entire video on how to create liquid locks in Oxygen Not Included. They are very simple to create even though they look quite complex. But go ahead and check the video out if you need to use the manual airlock for any reason, because I suggest you go right to the liquid lock. The reasons why a liquid lock is far superior to a manual airlock is because your duplicants don't need to open a door in order to get through, so it's going to make their tasks much more efficient. You can see these duplicants jumping right through the liquid locks. They don't have to sit there waiting for a door to open in order to get through, and yet all the gases are being blocked without any consequence to these duplicants. And if you're trying to separate rooms within your base in order to get morale bonus, you likely want to keep them open anyways, so your duplicants never have to wait for them to open. This can be done using a pneumatic door, which costs half the amount of resources to make at 100 than that of the manual airlock, which costs 200 resources to make. Tip number 6, creating vacuums. There are many reasons why you might want to create a vacuum in Oxygen Not Included, and there are two main ways to do so. The first and most popular one is of course using a gas pump. This is pretty straightforward. You simply put a gas pump into an enclosed space, and you start pumping out the atmosphere that's inside the closed space. If you wait long enough, eventually all of the oxygen in this room will be vacuumed out, and it will be transformed into a vacuum. Of course, there's nothing wrong with this, and you do have the inconvenience of bringing power to this location, which could be an isolated area somewhere within your asteroid. It might take just as long or longer just to bring the power to this area than it would be to vacuum it out entirely to create the vacuum. I'm going to show you how to create a vacuum using sandbox mode, but you can do this with your duplicants as well. Sandbox mode will just help expedite this process for the purposes of this video. Creating a vacuum can be as easy as filling an entire room with tiles where you're trying to create the vacuum. So for example, if I have this room and I'm trying to make a vacuum, I would simply get my duplicants to build tiles all over the ceilings and walls until all of the oxygen is deleted and there is nothing left in this room except for tiles. Of course, I'm going to need a liquid lock in order to prevent oxygen from getting back into this room once I start digging it back out. You have to fill every space with a tile in order to create the vacuum. All of the oxygen will simply be deleted because you've built tiles over them. So once we queue up the destruction command for our duplicants, and they eventually clear out all the tiles in this room, there's going to be nothing left but a vacuum. Of course, this means you're going to need a liquid lock in the entrance of this building and not a manual airlock, because as soon as you use a manual airlock for the first time with your duplicants, it will allow oxygen to come back into this room and it will destroy your vacuum. This is just another one of the many reasons why liquid locks are far superior to manual airlocks. The downside to this method versus the gas pump method is that it really only works for smaller spaces. Otherwise, your duplicants are going to be building all sorts of tiles everywhere and they're going to have to come back and destroy them all. And if the space is very tall vertically, they're going to build ladders just to build and destroy all these tiles. So the building tile method works really good if it's just a small confined space that you're trying to create a vacuum for. And the gas pump method works better for larger areas. A great example for where you want to create vacuums in very small spaces is between liquid locks. And this leads right into tip number 7, using liquid locks to prevent heat transfer. I have 3 liquid locks set up here, which is kind of excessive. You need 2 minimum to make this work. On the left side here, I have my main base where my duplicants are breathing the air that is provided for them. And on the right side is the outside of my base where the climate is much more harsh than on the inside. The liquid locks block the airflow between one area to another. And if I have a vacuum in between 2 separate liquid locks, it will also prevent heat transfer from occurring from one room to another. This is because the atmosphere on the far right will definitely heat up the liquid that is creating the liquid lock, but then the liquid on the left side has no atmosphere to transfer that heat to. You can see that the masterpiece artwork is 20 degrees Celsius, despite the water and the salt water that is creating the liquid lock being 40 degrees Celsius. This effect is much more evident in the Pincher Pepper Plant farm, where the heat differences are much more extreme. We're talking about 55 degrees Celsius on the far right and only 22 degrees Celsius on the far left. So you can see that the water that is creating this liquid lock is around 50 degrees Celsius. The internal atmosphere of this chamber has carbon dioxide because the duplicants take off their atmosuit in this area, which is running around 36 degrees Celsius. However, carbon dioxide is not very good at all in transferring heat. So the water on the far left that is creating the liquid lock and the heat separation is around 26 degrees Celsius. And the 26 degree water is unable to transfer its heat very well to the oxygen that is in my main base. Vacuumed out chambers can be also extremely useful for transporting very hot liquids, gases, or conveyor belts from one end of your base to the other. This chamber is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I have water that's coming in at 70 degrees Celsius that is feeding this carbon skimmer. This 70 degrees Celsius water is being transported in a regular copper liquid pipe that's not an insulated liquid pipe. It's a regular liquid pipe all the way into my carbon skimmer. At no point along this entire run of pipe do I use insulated liquid pipes. But if we take a look at our temperature overlay, this heat is not being transferred into any of the adjacent blocks and causing my base to heat up. This is because this entire chamber is vacuumed out. So if you don't have the resources to build long structures of insulated pipe or insulated material that you need to contain heat if you're transporting very hot substances, you can create a vacuumed out chamber that will do the task for you in the exact same way. Tip number 8, filtering your liquids and your gases. You're going to come across many instances where you need to filter out your substances that you're trying to send from one end of your base to the other, whether it's gases, liquids, or solids. For instance, in this room, I have hydrogen gas, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. And in this room, I have polluted water and salt water. Now, a perfectly reasonable method would be to use the gas filter or the liquid filter for each respective substance that you're trying to filter. These are both very easy to set up, and they have very clear indicators on how to set up your connections. The same can be said for the liquid filter. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with using the gas filter, liquid filter, or the solid conveyor belt filter, with the exception that they do take 120 watts. And if it's very early in your playthrough, the 120 watts may come at a premium, which can be a lot if you're still running on something like the manual generator or coal generators. So I have a proposal for you to use a much more efficient technique that is going to cost you a fraction of that power. An alternate method to using the gas filter, liquid filter, or conveyor filter is using shutoffs instead hooked up to automation. This is slightly more complicated, but it does the exact same thing at a fraction of the cost. No matter what substance that you're trying to filter, the shutoffs only take 10 watts of power each. Of course, the downside is that you do need refined metal in order to build the automation for this. Both the gas and the liquid shutoff work exactly the same. In the case of the gas shutoff, we have insulated pipe running into the inlet of the gas shutoff, and right before the gas shutoff, we're using a gas pipe element sensor. My gas pipe element sensor is set to allow only oxygen. So when oxygen passes through the pipe, it will turn the gas shutoff on and allow the oxygen to continue to pass through into the above chamber. For all other gases, it will send a red signal shutting off the gas shutoff, which will divert all of the gases into the secondary chamber. The gas pipe that diverts the unwanted gases is hooked up to the inlet as well. So when the gases coming into the shutoff have nowhere to go, it simply takes the next path and diverts off course to wherever you want to dump the unwanted substances. It's the exact same thing for the liquid shutoff. We have liquid pipe running into the inlet, which gets detected by the liquid pipe element sensor. In this case, I'm looking for salt water. When salt water passes through, it will send the green signal to the shutoff and allow it to pass through into the above chamber. Otherwise, all other liquids will get diverted into the chamber to the left. So let's go ahead and watch these in action. First, we'll start with the gas shutoff. We're going to turn the automation on and watch the gases pass through the filter. The carbon dioxide gets moved into the diversion chamber, and the clean oxygen is able to pass through in the upper chamber as intended. No matter how much carbon dioxide we add to this room, it will continue to filter all of the carbon dioxide. This also works for the hydrogen as it gets picked up by the gas pump. Anything that is not oxygen is sending a red signal and it's being diverted. Now let's take a look at the liquid pump. Again, we only want salt water in the upper chamber. So as you can see, as the salt water passes through the liquid pipe element sensor, it sends a red signal and it's able to pass through into the upper chamber. the polluted water will send a red signal and it will divert off course. If we add a different substance like crude oil, it will also get diverted. Only the salt water is able to send a green signal and pass through. There's one downside to this, and it showed off in my SPOM. When the gas shutoff gets backed up and it can no longer send the appropriate substance through into the chambers that you want it to send it to, such as the hydrogen being sent into the gas reservoir, it will also get bypassed in the diversion pipe. This means that if you don't have an infinite storage method, or if you're not constantly using up the hydrogen like in the case of the SPOM, it'll get diverted to wherever your diversion pipe goes. In the case of the SPOM, it's not all that bad because that diversion pipe goes into my hydrogen gas chamber. Just be sure to keep this in mind if you're going to use the gas, liquid, or solid shutoff as a filter. Tip number 9, rerolling duplicates from the printing pod. Now, some people might consider this a somewhat exploitative method of the game mechanics, but I'm showing you this because at the end of the day, this is a single player game, and you're not really harming anybody by using exploitative methods within the game mechanics. In fact, there are even mods that allow you to exploit game mechanics, so you don't have to do what I'm about to show you. So if you don't agree with this tip, I completely understand your point of view, whether it's very early within your colony or later in the game where you're searching for that perfect duplicate to take from the printing pod. You might get 4 options that are completely non-viable to your playthrough. This could be the duplicants just having terrible traits that you don't want to take on, or maybe you don't get a very good duplicant and 2 or 3 items that you just don't want to use. Now, duplicant traits don't really have that much of an impact on long-term playthrough anyways. Even the worst negative traits are very easy to overcome if you've been playing the game for quite some time. However, if you're a new player, or if you're very early in your colony, and you really need that 4th duplicant to not have an awful trait so you can introduce them to your colony and have them be very helpful to you right away, it may be helpful to reroll your duplicants if the ones that the game offers are not very good. And this is how you do it. Once your printing pod alerts you that there's duplicants available, do not touch the printing pod. Instead, save your game. Once you click on your printing pod and go to choose a blueprint, you're going to be presented with 4 options. In this case, I have Armani, Jean, Stila, and a Balm Lily Seed. If you're just taking your 4th duplicant, you might not want anyone like Jean to ever come near your colony because they are going to consume more food than the rest of your duplicants. And if you're playing on a particularly hard asteroid, they may be very difficult to feed. If all of the options that you're presented with are not of your liking, simply close the menu and reload your game. Once your game is reloaded, click back on the printing pod, choose a blueprint, and you'll be presented with 4 brand new options. In this case, something like spicy tofu may really help your colony if you're struggling with food production early on. So don't be afraid to use this method if you're struggling early and you need the perfect duplicant. You might end up rerolling a couple of times, but as long as you save before you click on your printing pod, you'll be able to get new duplicants from the machine. Keep in mind that once you click on choose a blueprint, your options are now loaded into the game. And if you save and reload after the fact, you'll get the exact same options, so be sure to save before clicking on the printing pod. And finally, tip number 10, explore the Steam Workshop to find the best mods to help you in your playthrough. There's a mod that allows you to do exactly what I just showed you and more with your duplicants that come from the printing pod. Instead of re-rolling over and over to try to find the best duplicant, you can select the exact traits that you want your duplicants to have before you accept them into your colony. This may be something that most people are not comfortable with doing because it ruins the randomness of the game that people find fun. But there are much less invasive mods that you can use that will help your playthrough that are much more visual than they are invasive to the nature of the game. For example, I'm using a mod that shows exactly the distance this auto sweeper is able to reach inside of this room. I find this extremely helpful because it allows me to place this auto sweeper exactly where I want it in order to get the most out of it. Another fantastic mod is the pip planting overlay mod. Like I talked about in my arbor trees video, pips have a very specific way of planting seeds within your colony, and this mod highlights all of the available places a pip can plant the seed. This can be very useful if you're planting arbor trees in an arbor tree farm because it will help you maximize the amount of arbor trees that you can plant. Some of the other mods that I recommend that help enhance your playthrough without necessarily being very invasive are the following. No more long commutes, which takes away the long commute notification that you often get when your colony gets a certain size. The airlock door can be a fun one to play around with, although I don't use it that often anymore. It allows you to create a passage which blocks any airflow from transferring from one chamber to another, much like a liquid lock. Show building ranges is the one I just talked about, which helps show pump, deodorizer, space scanner, and telescope ranges before you even build them. Better info cards, bigger camera zoom out, sandbox tools, which helps me with my tutorials, and the pip plant overlay. The mods that you see on screen are the only mods that I include in my playthrough, and most of them are non-invasive, but like I said, it's a single player game, so however you choose to play the game is up to you. Make sure you check out the entire mod list on the Steam Workshop and see what works for you and what can make the game more fun. And that does it for this round of tips on playing Oxygen Not Included. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you were able to learn something new that you're going to be able to implement in your playthroughs. If you did, be sure to let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear on what you were able to learn from this video. And definitely let me know if you have a tip that I missed that I should include on a future video. If you made it to the end, it would mean a lot to me if you left a rating on this video, as that would help me get this video out to more people in the algorithm. I have some cool videos coming out in the future, including starting my space series on how to prepare for space if you're a new player, and some more advanced tutorials such as building a sour gas boiler for the very first time. We're going to break break down all the different methods of how to build a successful sour gas boiler. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the videos. Thank you for those of you who are subscribed and have been coming to the channel regularly. It's so exciting seeing this channel grow, and we're almost at 500 subscribers. Until the next one, I'm Ethan, and I'll see you guys later.